Well, for those who love the game of baseball, baseball fans know that this is the time of year for spring training. And there are a lot of families who go to Florida during this time of year in vacation, and part of that vacation time is spent going to the spring training camp of their favorite team. I read recently about one family that was attending a spring training game, and when a batter stood at the plate to bat, the bat slipped from his hands and at a high rate of speed headed right into the stands. Now, that bat was coming right for the head of a little boy. It could have been a fatal accident, but just in time, that little boy's dad put his hand out like this and knocked the bat away. All just instinctively he did it. And while it injured the father's hand, he perhaps saved the little boy's life. For those of us who are parents, we understand that. Whatever we need to do to protect our children, we do it. It was as if when the father did that, he didn't have to pause and think about it. He just did it. It just came naturally to him. Some of you that are younger may not know this, but there was a time, and I remember the time, when we were not required by law to wear seat belts in our automobiles. You didn't have to do that. And sometimes, go off on a trip, and my brother and I just go to sleep in the back seat. There were no fancy car seats like you see today. There's no law requiring you to wear a seat belt. But for those of us who are young, we had seat belts. It was called the arm of a mother or father, right? And just the brakes applied, here came that arm across. And you were protected. Just instinctively, the parents put out an arm to protect their children from harm. I'm so thankful that there are so many faithful parents who love their children and want to protect them. I know that there are some parents who do not fulfill their responsibilities. I pity the children living in those homes. But for those of us who had parents who loved us enough to protect us, to care for us, to provide for us, that is a tremendous blessing. And I think we need to consider sometimes as children just how much respect and honor we give to our earthly parents. We've been talking about growing families God's way. I've talked about wives, husbands. Today, some counsel for children. The Bible admonishes us to honor and obey and love our parents. In fact, in Exodus 20, in the Decalogue, we remember from the 10 Commandments, honor thy father and thy mother, that it may be well with thee upon the land the Lord thy God giveth thee. And then Paul reiterated that in Ephesians 6, when beginning in verse 1, he says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee and thou mayest live long on the earth. Now, the first reason to obey parents is quite simple. It's the right thing to do. Children, obey your parents, for this is right. Sometimes I hear it said in this modern era, it's hard to tell what is right and what is wrong. Well, I know this. God says obeying parents is the right thing to do. And not only that, it is a great blessing. Now, it is important that we learn to honor our parents because parents are the first ones we meet. And if we do not learn how to conduct ourselves properly in the home, if we do not learn how to respect our parents and our siblings in the home, it is doubtful we will ever learn how to be respectful toward others in society. And so respect for others begins early on. It begins by our conduct in the home. This word honor, it means to add weight to. That is, you take God's command seriously, to reverence and to respect, to obey and to honor. That is what God admonishes children to do. And so this morning, I want to give you 4 ways to honor your parents. 4 ways to honor your parents. And I'm speaking to every one of us here. There are some in this audience whose parents have already left this earth. But I can tell you that there are some children of deceased parents who continue to honor their parents by living honorable lives. And God approves that. And so let's notice 4 ways to honor our parents. Number 1, we can honor our parents through the lives that we live. Honor our parents through the lives that we live. Now, your life and my life will either honor or dishonor our parents. Listen to this particular passage in Proverbs 29:15. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. What is the wise man talking about in this passage? He says a child that's untaught and undisciplined is going to bring shame upon his parents. And therefore, parents have a responsibility to teach and to train their children, and children have a responsibility to receive that proper training and that proper teaching and to honor their parents. Now, as a child, one should live obediently before his parents. And when one becomes older, more mature, while he may no longer be required to obey his parents, he still ought to respect what they say and honor them with his life. In Colossians 3:20, a passage that is parallel to Ephesians 6, children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord. So you want to please God? Then please your parents. There are blessings that come to us through obedience, but there is harm that can come our way when we are disobedient. It is amazing to me that as I study the Holy Scriptures, what the Bible has to say about disobedience to parents. In a long catalog of sins recorded in Romans 1, the latter part of the chapter, Paul mentions disobedience to parents as one of those awful sins that ought not to be found in the heart and lives of Christians. And so God says, don't be rebellious. In fact, those under the old covenant who were willfully defiant and rebellious of their parents, that brought the death penalty, Leviticus 20 and verse 9. So we're talking about something that God takes very, very seriously. In fact, once again, the Apostle Paul, speaking of a society that is unraveling in 2 Timothy 3, makes mention again of those who are disobedient to their parents. He says, you want to see the mark of a society that's gone astray, you look at the attitude of children toward their parents. And so if you do not want the judgment of God upon you, then you better remember what Paul admonished in Ephesians 6 when he says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, and honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise. Now, we talk about a lot of things today that are harmful to one's health. Someone suggested that maybe there ought to be a sign on every child's door, disobedience to parents is harmful to one's health. And I say amen to that. That's what the Bible teaches. God expects there to be order in society. He expects there to be order in the home. And God says to children, obey your parents. Now, remember, Paul also said this is a command that comes with a promise. Children, obey your parents. This is the right thing to do. And honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest live long upon the face of the earth. Well, I want to live a long time upon the earth. I'm sure you do. And Paul says one way that you can do that is by obeying your parents. Now, someone says, what if these parents tell me to do something wrong? Well, I admit, particularly in our society today, There may be parents who suggest to their children to do something that is wrong. I want to tell you this. It is always wrong to do wrong. It makes no difference who says that it's all right. If God says it's wrong, you're not to do it. And so if the elders or preachers or government officials or even parents said to do something that is wrong, then obviously don't do it. And Peter settled that question once and for all when he was standing before the council, and he said, we ought to obey God rather than men, Acts 5:29. So whenever anybody says, do this, and you know it's wrong, don't do it. Always honor God first. But that same God has said, obey your parents, and obey your parents in the Lord. That is, as your parents give you quality teaching and instruction, God says you are to listen to what your parents say and to follow their admonition. Now, little children, young children especially, need the guidance of parents. Why is that? Because those children are not capable just yet of making proper decisions. And so God says, I want to give these little ones parents who will love them more than life itself and will guide them and direct them in the way that these children should go. Now, I readily admit when I was a child, I didn't understand the way of my parents. I didn't understand why that it was necessary for me to take a nap. I didn't want to take a nap. My mother, my father, they didn't take naps, but always wanted me to take a nap. I didn't understand why you couldn't have candy at every meal. It seems right to me. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand why grown-ups thought it was fun to just sit around and talk. But that's what they would do. You see, the perspective of a child is different. And everything is so new to a child that the child has to be directed in the proper path, or the child will make some decisions that are not good. And so God gives parents to these young children to guide them and direct them. And God just makes this request of children. You obey them. Obey your mother and your father. Do what they say. They're looking out for your best interest. Don't complain. Just do what they ask you to do. Now, as we become older, then we are still to honor our parents. No, I don't get on the phone anymore and call my parents and ask them for permission to do something. And yet at the same time, I want my life to honor them. That passage again I mentioned earlier from Proverbs, a child left to himself brings his mother to shame. How is that? Because you see, each one of us, we are extensions of our mothers and our fathers. They are a part of us. We are a part of them. And so what brings me great joy is when I hear from my parents of their pride for that which I seek to do. And I think that's only natural for children. Parents love their children, guide their children, and direct their children. And God says to these children, you obey and you honor their parents. Now that's just one way we honor our parents. It's through the lives we live. Here's a second point. We can also honor our parents through the load that we lift. We're to help our parents. Very early in life, children are to be taught honesty and integrity and industry. It's very important that children learn what it means to work. And did you know that children can sin against their parents while living at home and never helping to lift the load their parents bear? That's right. Now this particularly applies to those who are in that teen category. You're provided a place to live. You are given food to eat. You are provided clothing, usually top of the line. Parents will go above and beyond to give you advantages that they did not have. The least that you can do then is just to quickly say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, When asked to perform a task, quickly do it. Don't complain about it. Don't murmur. Just do what you're asked to do out of respect for these who love you the most, your mom and your dad. There is no reason that children should complain against their parents. You can take enough time to get off of a gadget and do what your parents ask you to do. Now, let's consider something else. When our parents become older and we ourselves get older, we have a responsibility as children to care for them. We have a responsibility, according to God's Word, to care for the elderly. Did you know a society that becomes pagan is a society that will forget about the elderly? In our own nation, as we become more and more of a pagan nation, we're seeing more and more disrespect and dishonor for parents. In fact, some societies are known to just let the elderly wander off until finally these elderly folks die. But the Bible teaches something differently. We are to care for the elderly in our society, and particularly children are to care for their older parents. The Bible teaches us that we cannot use religion as an excuse for not taking care of our parents. I want you to notice what Jesus says about this in the 15th chapter of Matthew. He's speaking to the scribes and Pharisees who so often condemned him, and he's talking about how they transgress the commandment of God by their traditions, beginning in verse 3. And then Jesus says, "For God commanded, saying, Honor thy father and mother, and he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, Whosoever shall say to his father or his mother, It is a gift by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, and honor not his father or his mother, he shall be free. Thus have ye made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition." Here were some religious folks who thought that simply by giving to the Lord or giving to a charity, that excused them from taking care of their parents. It does not. I could devote all of my years to gospel preaching, but if I fail to take care of my parents when they are in need, God's going to hold me responsible. Doesn't make any difference how long I preached or how many souls I've brought to Him. If I do not care for my elderly parents in a time of need, then God is not at all impressed. And so God teaches us to care for our parents, and that might mean that when they are older, we have to feed them, we have to change them, we have to carry them to certain places. You say, "Well, I don't want to do anything like that for my parents." Isn't that what our parents did for us? Did not our parents change us and feed us and carry us around until we were able to do that on our own? And God says there may become a time when you likewise have to do that. Listen to the teaching of the Apostle Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 5, and note what Paul admonished older children to do on behalf of their older parents. In verse 4 of 1 Timothy 5, "But if any widow have children or nephews, let them first learn to show piety at home and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God. Now she that is a widow indeed and desolate trusteth in God and continueth in supplications and prayers night and day. But she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth. And these things give in charge that they may be blameless. But if any provide not for his own," now what's the context here? Caring for one's elderly parents. "If any provide not for his own, and specially for those of his own household, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." And so God says that our parents are to be cared for by their children. And so when an older couple has children, then that means those children should not be looking to the welfare office or the church to take care for those parents. It starts at home. It starts with the children caring for their elderly parents. So we can honor our parents through the lives that we live. We can honor our parents through the load that we lift. But here's a third point. We can also honor our parents through the lessons that we learn. Over in the very first chapter of the book of Proverbs, I want you to notice verses 8 and 9 as the wise man speaks to children about adhering to the teachings of their faithful parents. In verse 8, the writer says, "My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. For they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head, and chains about thy neck." I try to remember the quality teaching that I received from my parents. If one receives teaching that is not in harmony with the Word of God, then dismiss it. But oh, how we should be thankful for parents who taught us God's Word and taught us how to live and cling to that teaching. It's interesting that the older one gets, the smarter his parents become, right? A lot of people have told me that. The older you get, the smarter your parents seem to become. We start understanding a little bit more of why they said some of the things they said. Like this: "Because I said so." I didn't like hearing that as a child. Maybe there's some young people who hear that today, don't like to hear it. But sometimes it's good for parents to explain why they give a certain admonition, but parents also have the right to occasionally say, "Because I said so." That's enough. And therefore a child learns to submit to authority. The parents have authority over the children. And because the parents said it, it ought to be respected. How many times have children heard faithful parents say something like this: "No, you can't do that, and here's the reason, because you're my child. Because you're my child, I love you, I care for you. So what if others are going to be doing something? I don't think you should do it, and you're not going to do it. Not as long as you live under my roof will you do that, because it's not right, and I'm your parent. And I love you, and I want what is best for you." I have seen old men swell up with pride when they have considered their daddies who gave them a good spanking when they were boys. And the reason they swell up with pride when telling you about that is for this reason: that old man loved his boys so much, he was willing to correct them, to discipline them, to make sure his boys and his girls got started on the right path and stayed on that path. You and I can honor our parents through the lessons that we learn. Someone says, "Well, my parents just not as smart as I am." Well, I've heard that before too. But that's not what the Bible teaches, that we only have to honor and obey them if they're smart. Let me say this. Think for just a moment about some grandparents who are going to take a trip with the rest of the family. Here's an older couple who have children and grandchildren. And this older couple who's retired says, "We're going on this trip to Florida, and we're going to go down early. And we'll get everything set up just right in Florida. We'll get the accommodations set up, and you all just arrive when you get here. Everything will already be set up for you." And so these parents call a son or daughter and say, "Look, when you and the children head out, I want to give you a little admonition. I want you to avoid this particular road, or I want you to stop at this particular restaurant." And they just start giving advice to a son or daughter and say, "Here are the things you all need to do on your way down to meet us. Before you arrive, here is some good advice." Does a son or daughter hang up on his parents and say, "Don't tell me what to do"? No. No, they're going to thank the parents because they understand that the parents have traveled just a little farther down the road, right? And therefore, they have a little more understanding, a little more wisdom that they can share. And therefore, that admonition is received because the children know that is beneficial for them and beneficial for the grandchildren. We can honor our parents through the lessons that we learn. But not only do we honor our parents through the lives that we live and the load that we lift and the lessons we learn, but also through the love that we lavish upon them. You and I are alive today because of our parents. And we're part of them, whether we like that or not. That's how it is. And so we ought to seek out the best in our parents, because I think for most parents, they were well-intentioned. Most parents I've ever met will readily admit, hey, we made mistakes. We made mistakes. I already know that in my life as a parent, I've made mistakes. And so it's going to happen. But just because we make mistakes along the way in child rearing does not mean that we do not love our children. We love our children, and we want the very best for them. And I will say this, the closest love that one can ever know to the love of God is to have good parents while here on earth. To have good parents here on earth. Now, only perfect children should expect perfect parents. And by the way, only perfect parents should expect perfect children, right? That's only fair. Understand that. All of us who live in a household, every one of us, imperfect. And yet we still ought to shower love upon one another. How can we show that love? One thing we can do is just speak about our love for each other more often. That would help. I wonder why that's so difficult for us, but it is. To tell the dearest ones on earth how much we care about them, how much they mean to us. And as we get older, maybe we sometimes become forgetful about the needs of our parents. And sometimes parents become very, very lonely. Sometimes our parents are widowed and especially become lonely. And maybe just waiting more than anything else for a call or for a visit to let them know children still care. I remember when I was a boy, Coach Paul Bear Bryant, he did an advertisement for South Central Bell that became the best advertisement ever by that company. I mean, it struck the hearts of those who watched it. And it happened by accident. Coach Bryant was sitting behind his desk. He was talking about how important it is to reach out and touch someone by telephoning. And he then asked this question, have you called your mother today? And that was where the commercial was to end. But the producers overheard him mumble, and of course Coach Bryant usually always mumbled, but they heard him mumble these words, I sure wish I could call mine. And the producers said that's got to be a part of the advertisement. And so he asked the question, have you called your mother today? I sure wish I could call mine. No doubt there are some in this room today who wish it was possible to pick up the phone and to call a mom or dad and say, I love you, I miss you, I would love to see you. But there's still plenty of others in this room who could do that, and we need to do that. Obey our parents while we're young. Honor them throughout our lives. You say, well, my parents have done things that are not very honorable. I'll tell you this, you honor yourself when you honor your parents. Don't forget that. Maybe you have parents who have dishonored themselves. By honoring them through the life you live, you honor yourself. Don't forget that. And so, one of the greatest ways we can honor godly parents is by submitting ourselves to the teaching they have given us. It is very important that every person in the home honor God. And a child who reaches an age of accountability, as we sometimes call it, an age of responsibility where he can make an understanding of right and wrong, and has an understanding of what sin really is, a transgression of the law of God, he then needs to heed the admonition of parents and become a Christian. The home is only complete when all those accountable before God are faithful to Him. And so I urge anyone today outside of Christ to come to God. That same God in heaven loves us as a father loves his own children. Our Father in heaven, though, is perfect, unlike parents here on earth. He loves us with a selfless, sacrificial love. He was willing to give His only begotten Son that we might have life. And so there is hope for our homes today because of what Christ has done. He allows people to start all over again, including families. In fact, Christ came not only to save individuals, but also to save our homes. And so let's honor our parents by honoring Christ, being obedient to the gospel, and by living lives that are faithful to Him. I'll tell you this, whether your parents were Christians or not, they will be pleased to know that you're living a life that honors God. Think about these things. Respond if need be, while together we stand and sing.